Today's amazing guest is Aashish Dalal. Aashish Dalal is the founder and former CEO of ParkWhiz. In 2008, Aashish created the company to simplify the parking experience by connecting drivers with an open parking space. Since then, ParkWhiz has become the nation's top booking platform, conducting millions of transactions on its apps, saving drivers time and money. Under his leadership, ParkWhiz has raised more than $50 million in funding, and in May of this year, the company was acquired. As the leading innovator in the parking industry, Aashish was inducted in the National Parking Association's inaugural 40 Under 40 class in 2015, and he's also been named to Crain's Chicago 40 Under 40 and Crain's Tech 25. Before founding ParkWhiz, Aashish worked at IBM and founded Revision, a company which leveraged wireless sensors and IR technology to reinvent transportation from mass transit to metered parking. But aside from that, Aashish is also a dad, has two daughters, and it's my pleasure, Aashish. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Jay Neal. It's great to be here with you.
My God, man, I was just looking at that number, $50 million in funding. That's a huge, huge accomplishment. A lot of people don't even make it past just incorporating the startup. And when people look at this, they must be like, oh man, it must have been an easy ride. So what do you say to that?
Well, it depends on what your metrics in life are and how you cater success. First of all, thanks for having me on. It's been too long to be able to connect in this way, but I think the way I look at it is, there's a lot of definitions of success. To me, the least successful is the amount of capital you raise. And I think that, while the capital was necessary for us to grow, I actually spent the first 4 years of the business bootstrapping the company. No investors wanted to talk to us. They knew nothing about us. The Chicagoland where we built ParkWhiz, just didn't have a community at the time to raise capital. And so for me and my co-founder, we just saw a problem and we wanted to go solve it. And that to me was really the genesis of success. How do we attack a problem that clearly people had? And how do we create a solution that, at the time it was just, how can I solve the problem for my own benefit? And then how can I use that to help others?
It's pretty interesting, when you say that capital raise is not your only metric for success in life. So what are some of the other factors you look at, according to you, one should also look at aside from just the startup success or capital success to just figure out if they're successful in life?
Well, I think, again, when we define success, I think it's subjective, right? And so for me, with regards to a business, are you creating a product that people like, and not just but love? And are you solving a meaningful problem, right? We talk a lot about solutions in search of a problem, where people build these elegant, gorgeous solutions, but there's no actual problem to be solved. And for me, it's all about what are the problems we have, and there's problems everywhere. Problems to be just waiting to be solved. And so if you can understand the problem, understand the nature of the problem, understand the psychology of why the problem exists, then you can start to architect a solution. And that to me is really the focus of life, right? What problems can we solve meaningfully that can help ourselves, but then also help the people around us? And everything else beyond that is just sort of noise. And so when we start thinking about, he or she raised $1 billion fund, or things of that nature that to me just are noise, we lose focus on, what is that capital going to be used productively to solve, again, a problem.
Yeah. So from the start, when you had the idea for ParkWhiz to the point where the company was acquired, how many years is that collectively or approximately?
So if we're looking at it explicitly from when the company was formed, the company was formed in 2006. And the initial idea was a very different idea than what we are today. So it's been 15 years from June of 2006, 15 plus years from June of 2006 to the company's exit, if you will. But if I think about it in terms of the genesis of where this idea came from, it actually goes back all the way to when I was, probably preteen. And when I would be visiting India, we'd get on a flight. And for me, travel was something I abhorred. I hated traveling. And I hated it not in the sense, we lived in Pittsburgh, grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Mm-hmm.
And, my parents emigrated in 1968 from India. And we would, and I was born in Pittsburgh, but
Mm-hmm.
we would go back to India every couple of years and visit family and so forth. And I hated the flight to and from India. I mean, we take it for granted today. But you know what? We take it for granted today because as painful as the flight can be, when you're 10 years old, maybe even I was even younger, and none of the technology that we have today where we can pass time through our iPads. I was literally sitting on a flight with twiddling my thumbs for 22 hours.
Oh, they didn't have the in-house movies and stuff?
They did. But when you're flying antiquated airlines because we want to save $1, half the time you wouldn't be surprised if your device is the broken one on the plane.
Yeah.
And so it was torturous. And so for me, I always developed this sort of disdain for traveling. It was, how do I get to and from my destination in the most efficient way? So, a 22-hour flight can really chore you. But then if you take that, so that's where my frustrations with efficiency came from. I hated wasting time, and I always looked at that flight at 22 hours as a waste of time. And you fast forward to later in life, we were in college, and getting to and from your destination, going to we were in college and we would go to football games. I went to Northwestern University in Evanston, Illinois, and on game days we would leave around 10:30 a.m. to start tailgating and hanging out with some friends. And when we pull up to the stadium, there's literally no parking available. All the parking facilities were completely booked, and so we'd have to pull down these small streets. And Evanston is a very residential area, and so we would pull down these little streets trying to find a parking spot, nothing available. And finally we found this, I remember as a sophomore, we found and I was lucky enough to have friends who had a car, and our stadium wasn't literally on campus, so we had to drive. And so we found on this back lot in a resident's house, this family literally standing on their driveway, holding up a sign saying, "Park here for $10." And so this little girl was holding up a sign saying, "Hey, you can park it on our driveway." And we did that, and it was great. It was such a great experience. And I think that was another sort of moment in sort of the episodes that I've had over the course of this journey to understand that this is a problem. This is getting people to and from your destination, whether you're flying on a 22-hour flight or whether you're driving for 20 minutes. Getting there the fastest, because nobody wants it's not about the travel. The travel is the means to the end. We want to get to our destination, wherever that destination is, and how can we get there as fast as possible. And so in this own way, this girl had she was an entrepreneur at heart, holding up a sign for $10, and we were happy to give her that money. And I said, I think I filed that in the back of my mind saying, that's interesting. And, you fast forward, and interestingly enough, I didn't leave college to start ParkWhiz. I finished college, ended up getting some jobs and stuff like that, just like most people do. But I got sort of disamored with the, corporate world within a couple years, and went back, got my master's degree, and recognized this was the late 90s, that the intersection of the internet and technology in general, and these industries are on a crash course, right? Airline and hospitality industries are leveraging technology in meaningful ways where you can now book airline tickets on the web. You don't have to call a travel agent to book a flight. And I said, why can't we do what Expedia, American Airlines had all done for the airline industry and hospitality industry? Why can't we do that for the parking industry? And so ended up landing on parking. Nobody would ever think about parking as, you don't wake up thinking about parking. But I think that was the moment in 2004, actually, when I was still at IBM, where I was like, there might be something here. And it took me another year or so
Yeah.
before I actually made the plunge in 2006 to quit my job, and I just got married. But that was the
Oh my
time
God.
frame in which ParkWhiz was born.
Wow. I'm just literally thinking about this. Like the Genesis idea was obviously a longer time frame, but like from the point the company is formed, I'm almost thinking that you gave almost 15 years or maybe more of your life in making sure this idea of ParkWhiz is a success, and it has been a success. So it's like I'm literally just like I can feel something in my body like when I think about that number, 15 years of your life. And this is something that, you know, when people look at a TechCrunch report, like, oh, this company raised $100 million in funding, this company got acquired for $1 billion, XYZ. We don't really think about the price that people mentioned in the article have paid. Sure, luck plays a factor. So I think that was just mind blowing for me to think about that you devoted that many years of your life. And you mentioned that you were married at the time. So how does that conversation go? Because, you know, like if you were just like single and, you know, you were 18 or something trying to do a startup, I mean, yeah, I mean, you could fail and you just got to take care of it yourself. But with now that a partner you have in the question, do you have to have a conversation that, hey, honey, I'm going to like quit my stable job and then I'm going to do this startup thing? And it may work, it may not work. How did that conversation go about? Was there like any?
Yeah, it's not an easy conversation because so for me it was 2005 when I had in my mind made this commitment that I wanted to start something, that I knew there was something inside of me that said I'm not on the right path for me
Mm-hmm.
personally, at least career wise, and where I wanted to spend my time was somewhere else. I didn't know where that somewhere else was. It wasn't as if I had, this foresight to know where life was going to take me, but I knew the path that I was currently on, working at IBM and, another corporate job prior to that, that it wasn't the right path for me. Now, yes, at the time I had just gotten engaged, soon to be married. And so when I talked to my wife, um, actually when we were engaged, I said, listen, this is what I'm thinking. I don't
Yeah.
have a I don't have a plan. Let's put it this
Mm-hmm.
way. It wasn't the easiest of conversations. It definitely wasn't a conversation in which I think she looks back on fondly. But she knew going in that, that this was something I needed to do for myself,
Mm-hmm.
something I needed to satisfy. And I probably would have been a better person. I probably wouldn't have been a very good person if I wasn't able to satisfy that. And so, you
Yeah.
know, she took the plunge with me when we got married, where I literally quit my job at IBM almost. I can't remember the exact time frame, but
Mm-hmm.
right around the time we got married, and she
Wow.
was just graduating law school. And so we were fortunate enough to have supportive family. But even then, everyone was wondering, what are you guys going to do? Is she going to pay all the
Yeah.
bills? She was finishing up law school, getting a job. And, we had a lot of, and again, when you're 27, you're
Yeah.
not the most mature. You're entering a new relationship,
True.
um, and you don't even know yourself some of the things. So it wasn't easy. But we navigated it. And, you have to go through those dark days, those difficult conversations. When you're 27, you're also thinking of yourself as Superman. So,
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, we're going to, I showed her the financial projections, year one, we're going to do X, year two, we'll be $100 million company, so take it easy. This is the life. And it
Yeah.
never, of course, went that way.
Now, did you have some like timeline or like because I've read with when some entrepreneurs with partners when they start this kind of like entrepreneurial journey, they set a time stone like, okay, I'm gonna dedicate 3 years to this startup. If it doesn't work out, I'll figure out something more stable, something more predictable revenue wise, or income wise. So did you also have some kind of hard limit that okay, where your wife is like, if in 3 years, Ashish, this company doesn't hit this goal that we agreed upon, then you might have to just go back to, get a corporate job or do something else.
Yeah, we had those conversations without question. I think it's very difficult for anyone not to at least create some sense of a goal or framework in which you have these expectations. Of course, the vision's there. You don't know how a vision's going to play out,
Yeah.
and so you try to form some semblance of reality around these goals. but it never goes according to plan. And whatever that plan is that you create, you can throw it out literally the moment you
Yeah.
create the plan, because you already know it's not going to work this way. And so what ended up happening for us was, in 2007, we were making traction. I had found my co-founder, John, who was out of New York, and we had moved back to Chicago after we got married. And I said, okay, we're going to try this for a year. And so roughly 2006, we said, we're going to try to get this thing off the ground. And we were a hardware company. We were building these wireless sensors, and we made progress to the point where we said, we're going to go talk to some investors. And but we couldn't, but we struck out. And so, I was talking to my wife, and we were saying, I don't know if this is going to play out. But again, you would have thought, fold shop, go get a job. But we had built some interesting things on the back end that we thought, hey, but you can't just leave this thing. We want to tie this loose end, right? So many great companies have started because by accidents, right? Things in which they built it for something else, maybe an internal tool, and the internal tool becomes the billion-dollar idea.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so John had built this back end on the software side that we were like, you know what, this could actually be interesting, where we're a hardware company, but if we just became a marketplace, we could pivot away from hardware and actually start to, get buyers. Me at the time, we were thinking of drivers who needed a parking space going to an event. And we literally flipped the business on its head within a matter of 30 days. John built the front end out. And I mean, he was a brilliant engineer, can do both front end and back end graphics, full stack altogether. And, by the time I was talking to Repo, my wife, she's like, well, you have something here. Now the time frame is all messed up, right? Now we're past the year point in which we weren't drawing a salary, and you've got to play this thing out. We want to see how far can we go. And it took another year before we were able to scale revenue in a meaningful way. And so again, the initial plan that you come up with, a lot of times you can throw it out right from the get-go, and it comes down to sweat equity. It comes down to desire. It comes down to passion. And for us, even though everything and everyone around us was telling us, fold up, this isn't going to happen. Investors, family members, when are you going to go back and get a real job? You've got to learn to tune out. I mean, if you're passionate about it, you've got to just tune out the noise, and you've got to have a small circle of people who believe in you. But it doesn't need to be, a very big circle. And for me, it was luckily, a handful of family members that said, keep pushing. And that's what we did.
And you mentioned that it's helpful to have a small group of people who believe in you, who you're able to talk to. Because I believe in one of our earlier conversations, you had mentioned that as you were on this entrepreneurial journey, there were a few other like-minded folks like you in Chicago. And I believe what you told me was all the entrepreneurs in Chicago would get together, and you had some sort of like group meetup where you would rate yourself like, this week out of like 10, I am an 8 on the family side of things, maybe a 10 on the business side of things, or maybe a 5 on sleep side of things. So walk me through that. What was that group, and what was the purpose of that group there at that point?
So there was actually 2 groups, and probably a lot more than that. And so one of the things when you're a first-time entrepreneur, and even for those who are serial entrepreneurs, your network is everything from a support group perspective. And so when we moved back to Chicago, Chicago, this was 2007. Chicago wasn't a very established entrepreneurial community as it is today. I mean, today, it's on the map. It's no longer a flyover city. People come to Chicago to start their, startups. It's not just about the coasts. But in 2007, you could count on your hands, one, the number of venture capitalists that existed, and then you could count on the other hand the number of entrepreneurs. I would talk to family and friends and they're like, what's an entrepreneur? I don't even know what an entrepreneur. I couldn't even tell you the definition of what an entrepreneur is. They're like, is it someone who owns, they would conflate it with a small business or something of that nature, and it never involved technology. And so I didn't know what I didn't know. And so luckily for me, one thing that happened sort of serendipitously is an entrepreneur had reached out to me. I don't know how, maybe they came across our website, or maybe I'd talked to a friend of a friend, and he invited me to a breakfast club, if you will. And we literally would meet at a corner bakery or a handful of other different, I can't remember, it was an Aubon or a corner bakery, every, bi-weekly. And I didn't know it at the time, but these were the founders of Grubhub. These were the
Wow.
founders of Groupon. This was the founders of, Sitter City, handful of other, key marketplace entrepreneurs who at the time, in some cases, had built their businesses up a little bit further than where we had. But most of them were nascent entrepreneurs. All of them were first-time entrepreneurs, had never done it before. And we would literally just share, best practices. It was a very informal, how you guys doing? What can we do to help each other? Casual breakfast. And it was, I didn't realize it at the time, but it gave me the energy that I needed to know there was like-minded people out there going through the exact same struggles that I was going through mentally, because you'd wake up every day and you're like, what am I going to do? I took this big leap. I have no paycheck coming in, and I don't know what's the next thing I'm supposed to do. And so you, just like life, you just put your pants on one leg at a time and you take the next step. And those guys and gals would talk to me about, some of the things that they did, mistakes that they made, so that I wouldn't make those mistakes. In some cases, that you got to make these mistakes just so you can experiment. And that was extremely helpful. In terms of, you had asked the question about, rating ourselves across family life and things of that nature. After, if you fast forward 6 years after I raised our Series A round, we called it the Series A at the time. It was only about $2.5 million. Today, that'd probably be considered a pre-seed round. But
Yeah.
one of my investors had put me in touch with his other portfolio companies, where we talked with the CEOs, and we'd meet sort of like EO, entrepreneurs organization, where you can get together and help each other out. And again, it was another networking opportunity to share with like-minded people going through the same struggles. And so we met, I think it was once every 4 weeks, and we had a moderator who had founded Redbox. And so we all looked up to him, Greg, in terms of what he had built, and he was able to navigate us through a lot of frameworks, mind maps, to sort of help us unravel the chaos that's in a founder CEO's mind, and sort of the struggles, especially first time. And he helped us think through, what are you going through personally, individually, and rate yourself on a scale of 0 to 10. If you have a family, rate yourself on a scale of 0 to 10 of how much you're committing to your family, and then talk about your business. And those things vary on a week-to-week basis, but just the idea to say, okay, today I feel like I'm a 10 at the individual level, is great. But then when you realize that at the family level, I'm a 2, or from the business perspective, I'm a 7, you start to realize the imbalance that you have in life, where I'm giving a lot either to my business. And for me, for most of us, it was always my business is at a 9, right? I'm giving everything to my business. But my mental health is, is going to hell. I'm at a 1, right? My family life is probably, if it's only a 0, but you could probably even go negative, right? And so you start to realize that there's not balance, and that's not scalable. And for most people, and I saw this actually when we were bootstrapping, I had talked to entrepreneurs who were struggling with mental health. Unfortunately, I came across people that we worked with that committed suicide. And it was extremely discouraging to understand the stress levels that I was going through, to understand that was an outcome that people felt they had no choice but to take their own life. And
is it because they didn't get the success they wanted from the entrepreneur life?
It's actually fascinating, because some of the people that I had met actually, in my mind, were unbelievably successful.
Oh.
And you never know what's going on in someone's life, right? So I think we all struggle. Everybody struggles. Anybody who thinks, I think in this day and age with social media, we always look and say, oh, that person must have it all, right?
Yeah.
They figured it out, right? They're a god. But
Yes.
the reality is they have the same exact struggles. They might not be struggling in an area that you might be struggling in, but they're struggling somewhere in life in a major way, right? It might be a family member that's struggling and that they have to support them. It might be, mentally they have issues that you just might not be aware of. And so everyone across life is struggling in some way, shape, or form. And so nobody has this picture perfect life. And I don't know, for entrepreneurs and founders, what everyone's struggle is, but I knew for me, it was, my life is out of whack. I have, too much either on my business, too much on my mind, and you just got to find a way to deal with it. We all have got to figure out a way to deal with it. And some people cope with that in different ways. And I think today mental health has become at the forefront, or at least it's moving to the forefront of relative to success or material success. But I think we still have a long way to go.
And it's kind of hard for you, Ashish, because, as an entrepreneur, you have to project this picture of confidence that you figured things out in front of investors in some way, in front of your employees. You come home, your kids or your wife is looking at you. You don't want to just break down in front of them, because, if you break down, they kind of like break down. So it's like the cultural narrative kind of forces you to just like fake it till you make it. But, there's only a limit to how much, like at some point you are going to feel a little bit tense or worried about things. You're human too.
I think that's a good point. I mean, I think what I've learned, and I don't know if this is the case for everybody, but I think vulnerability is something it took me a while to appreciate and sort of shed, and allow it to actually become a quality that defines who I am, right? Because once you start to realize that you don't need to pretend to be someone you're not, I think that level of authenticity is what people look for in terms of leadership. Not everyone abides by this. I think there's still an extent of people that want that bravado,
Yeah.
macho, I'm better than the rest of the world, but it's not sustainable. It's even if it looks like it's sustainable, internally it rips you apart. I mean, the science just doesn't support that from a human nature perspective. Carrying that type of weight on the world, on your shoulders is sustainable. And so for me, I just found a lot more peace. That doesn't mean I didn't do the fake it till you make it and things of that nature early on, but you have to pick your moments very carefully. Yes, I think when you're talking to investors, when you're talking to your employees, you have to project confidence. You have to show leadership with regards to the direction of the company from a product perspective, from a consumer perspective. But it doesn't mean that you have to carry this image that you have all the answers with regards to even the product, let alone how to get there, right? And I think it's that balance between vulnerability and confidence that truly defines leadership, truly defines success. Because you got to, at the end of the day, you have to make peace with yourself. When you go to bed at night, you're not with anybody else. Even if there's someone next to you in the bed, you're with your own thoughts. And those thoughts,
Yes,
they're the ones that drive your mentality. They're the ones that drive the actions that you take on a daily basis. And if you have too much chaos in your brain, it just doesn't matter how successful you are materially, you're going to be miserable in life.
I'm trying to think just the amount of pressure you had in your shoulders. At one point, you had hundreds of employees, and you're the leader in charge of the ship. So did you ever feel that pressure that in a way that your decisions could impact in some way the livelihood of all these employees who are working at ParkWhiz? Like, did you feel that burden, or was it like, no, they're just...
Oh yeah, without question. I mean, I think that actually more than investors or board members, or if I piss somebody off from an investment perspective or otherwise, the employees kept me up more than anything. I would wake up. I remember many nights, more than I care to remember, where I would wake up at 2 a.m. and be worried about an employee's X or Y, whether it's if we had to let them go, or worried about a group of an issue that the team was having. I mean, those things would keep me up way. Today, I can deal with it a lot better in terms of, I think I've matured and understood how to handle certain problems. But in the earlier days, when we were 5 years old, had raised capital, had a lot of goals that we had achieved from a product perspective, or we're launching a new innovative idea. The impact of how it would play out in the marketplace, as well as the teams that would build those, I would wake up with cold sweats. I mean, I would wake up in the middle of the night. I'd wake up at 2, 3 in the morning and try not to, disturb my wife. And she would unfortunately wake up and be like, "Are you okay? What's going on? Let's talk about it." And I just felt guilty. I felt, scared. Even when we were succeeding, there were so many times that I just couldn't appreciate the things we were accomplishing because, you just, like you said, you have so many problems, the weight of the world, that sometimes you can't even appreciate the moment until it's way gone.
Oh my God. It's almost making me wonder that even when you're successful, right? There's always this thing, right? Like whenever you do a trade, whenever you buy something, there's always this probability that something could go wrong. And in your case, the success of the company not only impacts your financial future, but like your kids are looking at you to be successful. Everyone is, right? And then you also have the employees. So I'm just trying to like really even gauge. I mean, I've never been in your shoes, so it's even hard for me to fathom. But I'm just thinking about like the amount of pressure that is there for you to make sure this. And now I know every entrepreneur wants a startup to be successful, but the stakes are just so high, man. Like for your family's future, for all the other employees, for just this startup to be successful, and just you dealing with that.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's, I think it comes back down to not taking I think the learning for me that I can take into my future is
Mm-hmm.
to not take yourself so seriously. Upon reflection, I think that too many times, whatever the goals we set out for ourselves and that we all want to achieve, whether we're, 8 years old, my 8-year-old wants to achieve X goal, or my 12-year-old wants to achieve X goal, or my wife wants to achieve a goal, or I want to achieve, whatever the goals are. At the end of the day, whether we achieve them or not is less important than the journey, right? And actually, the process. And so for me, if I can walk away saying I put my blood, sweat, tears into X, and I didn't get the result that I wanted, whatever the goal I set out to achieve, I didn't get the goal. I want to be a $1 billion company. I want, a billion users, whatever this, moonshot goal that we set. If we don't achieve it, that doesn't bother me anymore, right? You still set these ambitious goals, but to me, it's the goal sets the process. And to me, it's about the process. And that's what I've learned to appreciate is like, and then you can just appreciate life, and then you can be present. And so for me, it's all about being present, being in the moment. I still have, personal goals that I want to achieve for myself. And sometimes I don't achieve those goals, and I can see the maturity in terms of I'm actually sometimes more at peace today when I don't achieve a goal, but have appreciated the process and I've come a little bit short of the goal than when in my early days when I would actually crush a goal and be at the top of whatever it was I was doing. Even as a child, whether it was music or otherwise, and I was, an accomplished musician, and I, was miserable because I was like, oh, I didn't do this or I didn't do that. And so you're so hard on yourself. And so I think, again, that goes back to that mental awareness, the mental satisfaction that, we should push ourselves, but understand at the end of the day, there's pushing ourselves, and then there's satisfaction, and then there's fulfillment. And you've got to find that balance between all those things so that you can just appreciate the journey.
And not beating yourself up, because so many entrepreneurs, like the goals are like, oh, I want to be featured in TechCrunch. I want to like maybe come on the cover of Fortune magazine, or maybe I want to take my company public. But it doesn't always pan out that way. And I'm not there yet, but to your point, I definitely am working on the part about something about setting goals. But then if you don't get there, like this is a pretty interesting conversation. I was talking to my dad, who's right now in India, and he was just like, sharing his life wisdom, and sometimes we just share some insane wisdom that, because I'm like, Dad, I want to do this. I have all these goals, and he's like, yeah, have those goals. Like, if you want to be featured on a cover of magazine, whatever, sure. But if that doesn't happen, don't be any less happy than you were before. So I think that was just like very profound, like what you were talking and what my dad was telling me earlier about just like,
Well,
yeah,
I'll say
go ahead.
this. I sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I was going to say to that point, like if you think about what I shared with you earlier about going to India and how much I hated it as a kid, and it was about the destination, right? I wanted to get to my destination so fast that the means were irrelevant, right?
Mm-hmm.
And parking, I wanted to solve parking, get people to their destination. But I think not to wax philosophy here, but I think the irony in all of this is that the goals that I set forth in my life are about the end. I want to get to X as fast as possible. I want to get to India. I don't want to be on this 22-hour flight. I want to get to the stadium as fast as possible. And what's ironic is those very goals help me appreciate that it is about the journey. It's not about the end. And we put too much emphasis on, when we define success. Oh, did he become a billionaire? Oh, no, he didn't. Okay, he was a failure, right? And I've met so many people who actually ended up being billionaires. Or you read about them. Jack Ma is a great example of this, where, one of the richest men in the world. And he says, when I was a teacher, I was happier than I am
Yeah,
now as a billionaire. Now, of course, we can all look at him saying, well, it'd be, I'd love to trade lives with you or whatever. But I think there
absolutely.
is truth to what he's saying, right? I mean, we all, at the end of the day, when we accomplish our goals, and everyone's accomplished their goals, there might be different goals, but whatever goal you accomplish, you're already on to the next goal. Nobody sits back and says, once they have accomplished their goal, whether you're a billionaire or whether you want to, become, uh, get all A's or go to Harvard, whatever the goal you set forth. Once you achieve that goal, nobody sits there and reflects on it saying, all right, that's it, I'm done. You're already on to the next goal. And so in life, we're just constantly goal seeking. And I don't think you can find fulfillment. I think setting goals is extremely important. Don't get me wrong, but I think fulfillment comes through the journey. And at the end of the day, if you end up, I think my philosophy that I've learned in life now is, if I became a billionaire, became a jerk through the process, and there were moments in which I was a jerk, either to my family, or didn't provide them the necessary, compassion or appreciation for the sacrifices they made in my life. If that's who I end up becoming, then I failed. I think that's a failure. I think that's a greater failure than someone who didn't achieve their goal, but exhibited compassion and looking out for people throughout life. To me, that's the mark of a man, or a human being, is how you handled yourself through the adversity. Because the reality is we have so little control over the things that happen in our life. I think we'd like to believe we have
Yes,
control. I think we like to believe that we're in charge of our life, but the reality is we have so little control. And so I think the real test is, whatever happens to you, whatever the adversity that comes your way or success that comes your way, how do you handle it? If you become a billionaire, how do you handle that success? If everything you do, you're a failure at, or in the eyes of the goals that you set forward, you're a failure, how do you handle that? That to me is the real test. That's what we're being measured on. And that's the way I try to look at everything that I now do through that lens.
that is deep. So a question is, and I'm going to use my example. This is turning into a therapy session. I love this. I can look at your journey and be like, my God, Ashish is such a successful entrepreneur, raised so much money, has done all this, got featured in so many publications. What if I find out, due to whatever reason, that maybe I'm not equipped to do what Ashish did, or maybe I'm not good enough to follow in his footsteps, or whatever that may be. Maybe I don't want to become an entrepreneur like you. But if you look at the media narrative, it celebrates people like you. It really like lifts people like you up, puts people like you on the front cover, and it kind of like, there's this, not, I wouldn't say FOMO, but like, I see your cover on some magazine, I'm like, oh man, I should be like him, right? So how to deal with that? The fact that, okay, cool, Ashish did it for himself, but maybe that's not something I want to do. Maybe I don't want to like, you know, go through that crazy ride that you went through. Or maybe I'm not good enough. So how to like come peace with that? Any advice on that?
I don't know about advice, but what I can say is I struggle with the same thing you struggle with. I struggle with that today. I have lots of friends who are way more quote unquote successful in their lives in terms of, serial entrepreneurs, have built $1 billion enterprises, and or I've circled their wagons, and so there's always that. What's the saying? You feel like a fraud, or you feel like you're not measuring up to the peers in your life. But I think for me, while again, I think it comes back to the thoughts that we have. Our thoughts are not ours. Every thought that comes from within us, we don't need to attach to them. I have 2 kids now that help me sort of. I see through them the struggles that I had, not only as a kid, but even more so as an adult, because I can see the way they're I can see before they even act, I can see how their minds are working in terms of fulfilling a desire that they have, that you can already see, oh, this is not going to go well.
You have an example that comes to mind?
Just when we sit down and watch a TV show as a family, and it's an indulgence, right? We're, you're ready, gotta go to bed and stuff like that. The natural thing is, and this is a human characteristic, is we always want more. We never appreciate what we have in front of us, but we always want more. So at the end of the conclusion of the show, one of them will say, "Can we watch another one?" It's this desire for more. We always want more, right? And we have these thoughts in our brain that say, I got to have more. I got to have more. I got to have this, or this wasn't enough. We're never satisfied with what we have. We never appreciate what we have or what we received. And so, we'll get frustrated, and I'll get frustrated. I'll be like, come on, guys, we gave you something that you weren't even supposed to have, and now you want more. Think about that, right? Think about where you are in life and what you received, and you don't even appreciate where you are. And the problem is because, to your point, we're comparing ourselves. We're always looking at the person next to us. And so for me, the internal benchmark isn't looking to your right. It's not looking to your left. It's looking to yourself and saying, okay, where am I on my journey in life? Because when I leave this world, I'm not going with these people. Where am I in my life? And am I better or worse relative to the metrics that are important to me relative to where I was yesterday? And if the answer is, I made progress, then that's a good day. If the answer is steady state, I didn't make as much progress, okay, we got work to do. If the answer is I'm worse off than I was yesterday, we got improvement to do, right? And I think that's the problem that the physical world has, is that we use our senses, our ears and eyes, and we use them in the wrong way. We use them in a way to judge ourselves, to judge others, when they should be all motivating forces. They should be motivating forces to say, oh, well, that person's amazing at what they do. I appreciate them for what their characteristics has, but I too have a superpower. And I want to make sure that how I can leverage my superpower is to the best of my ability. I didn't know how I got these powers, but I'm going to take advantage of them, because I know at the end of the day, they're not going to last. And so you got to be in the moment to appreciate who you are, where you come from. And a lot of the questions we just won't know the answers to. I mean, again, not to wax philosophy here, but we just don't know. And so you got to learn to appreciate what you have and just be in the moment.
And as you were talking about wanting more, and you're talking about like just hanging out with friends who are billionaires or acquaintances, an interesting story came to my mind. So, like a lot of guys want to get like washboard abs or six packs and whatnot. I'm very lucky that I have a friend who is extremely fit. He's got six pack abs and stuff. And I've been hanging out with him. I've known him for quite some time, so we were hanging out, and we'll just be sitting there. And so one day I remember I was hanging out with him the whole day, and he's fasting the whole day. And then when he actually went out to eat food, he's got this like small scale in which he measures like in grams, like pounds, how much he's eating. Like literally everything is weighed. Like it's not just like, oh, I like this, I'm gonna eat this. If you look at his food cabinet, it's just a bunch of like raw food. Like there's no indulgences. And I was like, hanging out with this person, I see like how they've achieved this goal and what the price they've paid. And Ashish, in that moment, I was like, I don't think I want to pay that price. Like I want to be able to like go out and eat some ice cream and stuff and eat some sugar. And it was a very conscious decision that I made, that even though I know that's a goal that would be kind of nice to have, and maybe a part of me does want it, but a part of me just wasn't willing to pay the price. And I just made peace with that, you know what, I don't want six-pack abs. I want to be able to eat some nice food, enjoy, and good for him that he's willing to pay that price. So that was something interesting for me, is just hanging out with people and paying attention to what is the price they're paying for this. Because you also paid a price, a significant price, to get where you are today too.
I think to that point, we can look to Apple. If we want to bring this back from a design perspective, and I think the brilliance of Apple, if you look at, and I share this with my kids, I've shared this with my employees. If you look at what is it about Apple that differentiates itself from companies like, Dell. I mean, Dell's a great company too, but a lot of the PC based companies, those companies focus on the what, right? Apple focuses on the why. Okay. And so when you think about it when you think about the design side of things, if you're not attacking life from the why, but you're attacking it from the what, it becomes extremely transactional. And so the question why, if you're not constantly asking who and why about every decision in life, you're going to end up feeling empty, because you're going after the what and the how. And the what and the how are extremely important questions. They're necessary questions to eventually answer on the, in whatever you architect in life. But you won't find sustainability if you're not constantly asking first, before you engage in the what, why. So if you want to get washboard abs, the question is why? Yeah. Right? And there might be a very good reason for why. And if you can answer that question, why, coherently to yourself, and you don't have to ask this question to anybody but yourself, but if you can't answer that question, why, well, the what is going to disappear really fast, and the how, right? So I wake up every day, and there are things that I do in life that I ask the question, why? Why am I doing this? Why am I doing this? Why am I doing X? Why am I doing Y? And the moment I lose track of the why, I quit, because it's no longer fulfilling for me, because now I'm doing it for reasons in which I don't even know why I'm doing this anymore, right? So every day I ask myself, who am I? I mean, this sounds crazy, but I ask myself, who am I and why am I here? And why am I doing this? Why am I doing X? And that little sort of life hack, biohack, whatever you want to call it, keeps me focused on the things that I'm doing. You get to try a lot of different things, but you can quickly pivot away from things that are wasteful in your life by simply asking, why am I doing this?
The answer for me, Ashish, is I'm so embarrassed to admit this, but when I asked myself, like, why do you even want these washboard apps? And the answer was like so like stupid now that I think about it. It was just because the media thought, or social media just made it something cool, like oh, this is a goal you should strive for. Or people I was hanging out with seemed to prioritize that. So it's like I didn't have any reason. It was just that the vicinity around me or the surroundings around me prioritized that, and I kind of like got strung along with that. You're like, oh, everybody's around me doing it, so I think I should also do it, kind of thing. But that's not a good answer either.
Well, I don't think, but I think you're being a little harsh on yourself in that, or unfair, because I think that's what most of us do. And I think we all struggle to it to some extent. I mean, I definitely struggled with it. I raised my first round, or I attempted to raise my first round of capital, in which we got rejected. We actually got turned down after we signed a term sheet. And then I looked at it and said, why am I raising this capital? And literally, I could make up reasons why we were raising at the time, but I had no understanding of use of sources or use of proceeds to understand what we're doing. Why did I want to raise that capital? Oh, so that I could prove to the world and those around me who were naysayers that says, hey, look, look what I did. I raised, $1 million. What have you done? And at the end of the day, that's ego. And that's not going to take me very far. Maybe I'll feel good in a conversation to tell somebody, name drop or say I did this, and I can hang that on my quote unquote resume. But what have I really accomplished? I haven't accomplished anything, right? And who am I trying to prove this to? And part of it goes back to like we're all sort of just trying to prove to ourselves, to the world, that we're worthy of something. And at the end of the day, that's not what it's about. It's not about that. It's about creating value. It's about creating meaning. And you don't need to do it to a billion people. You don't need to do it through a monetary means of saying that so-and-so is a billionaire. That must mean they had a successful life. You simply, I've seen people who aren't entrepreneurs trying to scale businesses to impact millions, and just literally the impact that they have on one person's life can be profound enough to say that person lived an unbelievable life. And to me, that's how I want to be remembered, or that's how I want to make sure I walk away from all this, is that did I impact one person's life? Did I make meaningful impact on my own life? Right? It's less about the noise, which, yes, to your point, the media they're in the business to make money, right?
Yes.
And at the end of the day, as human beings, sensational news is what gets our attention. It's just the way we're wired. And for me and anybody who wants to listen to me, it's about, finding ways to distract ourselves from the noise. All of that is noise, right? All of that is the wrong. And I got swept up to it. I started ParkWhiz because I wanted to solve a problem. Yes, we want to make money. Nobody's doing it you have to sustain a lifestyle. A certain lifestyle that you want to live. But if you're doing it for money first, I've seen plenty of people succeed relative to that goal, but it's not sustainable. They won't be happy I can guarantee anybody who's telling you that they're happy and they did it because they wanted to be a billionaire, I can guarantee deep inside they are miserable. They might not even realize it, but deep inside they are miserable. And I just don't think that's worth, I don't consider that a worthwhile, fulfilling life.
Absolutely, Aashish. So how can people contact you or reach out to you if, design entrepreneurs or designers who maybe just want to keep in touch with you?
Yeah. And so for me, I have not built the most prolific Twitter profile, but I can always email me at adalal1@gmail.com, or you can always reach out to me if people know me. You can text me, or I'm always, or LinkedIn or otherwise, I'm always looking to help people from an entrepreneurial perspective, a life perspective. All of them are intertwined, and happy to wax philosophy or psychology or otherwise, even product and things of that nature. So always looking to engage and connect, because I'm still looking to grow myself.
Thank you so much, Aashish. This was a blast. Thank you for coming on the show.
No, this is great. I enjoyed the conversation. Appreciate you having me on.